a relaxed manner in Germany, between a German economist and a Greek economist. This is the integration that we need in this continent, instead of the shouting matches we've had, instead of the toxic press, instead of Bild-Zeitung versus Greek newspapers. I'm sorry, but I had to express that great sense of well-being that I'm experiencing at this moment. And then you come to your talk and say that I'm struggling to find something to disagree with. Except one thing. Except one thing. Your analysis is, of course, completely correct. And it's more or less a reflection also of what I said. So we are like mirror images of one another. My disagreement and deep concern touches upon one issue. Your arguments are splendid arguments as to why we should not have created the Eurozone. My position on the Euro has been distorted many times by the press because I've always said that I wish that Greece had not entered the Eurozone, for reasons that Professor Sinn so beautifully outlined. And indeed, in the 1990s, I lost lots of friends in Greece because I publicly opposed Greece's entry into the Eurozone. I actually opposed the entry of almost everyone into the Eurozone because I thought that it was, I don't have a problem with a single currency, I have a problem with this single currency the way it was designed. But my fear is that once you're in the Eurozone, this is another matter to say that you shouldn't have gotten in from saying you should get out, because the path matters. It's a question of dynamics, not just of statics. I wish we were out of the Eurozone, but getting out of the Eurozone once we're in is a very significant problem. Let me be precise. What would it take? I was Minister of Finance. And people ask me, Minister, don't you think we should start planning for Brexit for the reasons that Professor Sinn outlined? How do you do it? You mentioned 1992. That was when Italy, as well as Britain, escaped the ERM. And the result was that they avoided a major depression, both Italy and Britain. And they did very well to escape. It's similar to what happened in 1931 when Britain escaped the gold standard, in 2002 when Argentina cut the peg with the US dollar. These fixed exchange rate regimes are designed to fail. What happens is, the moment you establish the fixed exchange regime, you've got what Professor Sinn was saying, you've got over-borrowing by the deficit regions, but at the same time, it's a symmetrical problem. Because of the fixity of the exchange rate, the surplus regions like Germany tend to accumulate a very large surplus, which then depresses effective interest rates, so the bankers in Frankfurt have an incentive to go to Spain, to Greece, to Ireland, and find borrowers to lend from them. So it's a totally symmetrical problem. Now, in 1992, though, Italy had the lira. The lira was pegged to the Deutsche Mark. And what happened then was that this peg was broken. Just like sterling was decoupled from the gold standard in 1931, from the ERM again in 1992, Argentina was decoupled, the peso was decoupled from the US dollar. Now, we didn't have the gap last month, or when I was minister. I didn't have a peg to snap. To get out of the Eurozone, I had to create a currency to devalue it. But the mechanics matter, because this would mean, and of course I looked into it, it was my moral and political duty to look into it, regardless of whether I agreed or not with the idea of Brexit. It would take a minimum of 12 months from the moment I would decide to create a new currency, and therefore exit, to the moment when the new currency would be fully functional, the ATMs would churn in and out, the banking system will be recalibrated, the payment system will be ready to handle it. This is equivalent, going back to the 1992 example, Imagine if in Italy in 1992, the Ministry of Finance were to announce that in a year's time, Italy would devalue the lira. In a year's time. You go back to the Stone Age, effectively. Yeah? You give 12 months to speculators as well as to residents to sell everything, to convert in the Deutschmark, to bring everything to Frankfurt a year. Even if you give them 2 days, you're in a serious trouble. And there is no way you can start this process of creating a new currency to devalue it without it leaking. I had a team in my ministry, actually in the room next door to my office, working on this plan B. By the way, a little aside here, for weeks after my resignation, I was being castigated by the international press for being an idiot, not having a plan B. When I came up with the news that I did have a plan B, I was castigated for high treason for having a plan B. This is the Eroeffnung that Professor Sinn was talking about. We turned the currency into a fetish. Yeah? So whether you are for the euro, you're fetishizing the euro, but even in my country, colleagues of mine who wanted to go to the drachma fetishized the drachma. Suddenly going to the drachma, especially the left-wingers in my party, thought that this was the road to socialism. Said to me, I grew up with the drachma, I don't remember Greeks being socialist. So that's an aside, and strengthening your argument that indeed, and this is a very important point, currencies are instruments which we ought to be using for the perpetuation and the persecution of common objectives for prosperity, for peace, for freedom. I agree. In Europe, we have fetishized currencies, whether we're in favor of one currency or the other. Okay, I close this bracket now and go back to the issue. Imagine, however, a situation where all transactions were electronic. If all transactions were electronic in Greece, when I was minister, this fear of devaluation would go away. Because at the touch of a button, it's no longer euros, it's Greek euros or drachmas. That would change completely the discussion between us and the institutions and other governments. Because how were we crushed? And we were crushed. Because the ECB decided to impose the Troika's will upon us by threatening and then carrying out a bank closure. But if all payments are electronic, it doesn't matter. You don't need to go into the bank, actually. Yeah? And then suddenly it will be much easier to have a genuine discussion about things that happen. So I'm all in favor of digitization of money, independently of whether you think we should stay all in the euro or go our separate ways. And the last point I want to make, however, creating some difference between Professor Sinn and myself. As I said before, your arguments are excellent arguments as to why I should not have created the euro. But now that we've created, and where we are, at this present point in time, I very much fear the centrifugal forces that will be unleashed upon Europe if we break up. Especially given that we don't have full digitization, and there will be severe transaction costs involved. My great fear is that with the global economy still incapable of achieving escape velocity from the previous crisis, partly to a large extent to Europe's inability to get its act together. We are a great impediment to global growth. We are doing much damage to Latin America, to China, to the United States, to India, by not managing to overcome the crisis 2 years ago. Now, if at this juncture we split up, I have no doubt that there is going to be a division in Europe between a stagflationary part, a part involving, let's say, Italy, Greece, other countries, call it the Latin Union, where you're going to have devaluing currency, high inflation, and continuing unemployment, while at the same time, in Germany, in Holland, in Slovakia, in Finland, you're going to have the current deflationary process is reinforced by a revaluing currency in a world of effectively a competitive devaluation, which is what's happening now in the United States, China, and so on. And my great fear is political. If you have north of the Alps and maybe east of the Rhine a deflationary phase with a stagflationary phase everywhere else in Europe, in the current global conditions, I very much fear a postmodern 1930s, which is going to make integration in Europe a thing of the past, make it even harder, and the only beneficiaries of that will be the outer right wing, the nationalists, those who actually loathe Europe.